Bullies find out that their teacher is a kung fu legend. What happens next will shock you. The bell rang, signaling the end of another chaotic day at Riverstone High. Students poured out of classrooms, their chatter filling the hallways. At his desk in room 204, Mr. Wei calmly packed his books, seemingly unbothered by the whirlwind of activity around him. His thin frame and wire-rimmed glasses gave him an air of fragility, and his gentle voice rarely rose above the noise. To most students, he was invisible, a man they hardly noticed unless they needed help on an essay or a forgotten quiz. But to Elliot, Mr. Wei was a comforting presence. Elliot often lingered after class, fiddling nervously with his backpack as he gathered the courage to speak. "Is everything okay, Elliot?" Mr. Wei asked softly, looking up from his neatly stacked papers. Elliot hesitated. "Yeah, it's just, I guess I like staying here. It's quiet." Mr. Wei nodded knowingly. "The world is loud. Sometimes we need quiet places to think." Elliot smiled faintly, but his moment of peace didn't last. From the hallway came the unmistakable sound of laughter. Jake and his gang. Elliot froze, his heart pounding. Jake, Sam, and Tyler were Riverstone's infamous trio of bullies. They thrived on making other people feel small, and Elliot had become their favorite target. "You know they're waiting for you," Mr. Wei said, his voice still calm. Elliot stared at the floor. "Yeah, I know." Mr. Wei studied him for a moment, then returned to his papers. "Go. Don't let them wait too long." Elliot glanced at his teacher, puzzled by his lack of concern. But Mr. Wei always seemed this way, detached, as though bullying was just another storm cloud that would eventually blow away. Elliot didn't understand how someone so perceptive could be so unwilling to act. As Elliot stepped into the hallway, Jake's voice boomed, "There's our favorite bookworm." The three boys closed in quickly. Jake grabbed Elliot's backpack, unzipping it and dumping its contents onto the floor. Books and papers scattered everywhere. Sam and Tyler howled with laughter as Jake held up a worn copy of The Hobbit. "What is this?" Jake said, flipping through the pages. "You got a map in here? Planning an adventure." "Just give it back," Elliot muttered, his voice barely audible. "Sorry, what was that?" Jake leaned in, grinning. "Didn't catch that." Elliot's eyes darted to Mr. Wei's door. He knew the teacher was still inside, but the door remained shut. A wave of disappointment washed over him. Why didn't Mr. Wei ever step in? Did he just not care? After a few more taunts, Jake dropped the book onto the floor, kicking it down the hallway. "Better hurry, nerd. It's a long way to the Shire." The trio laughed as they sauntered off, leaving Elliot to gather his scattered belongings. He wiped his eyes quickly, hoping no one had noticed his tears. Later that evening, the streets of Riverstone were eerily quiet. Elliot walked home alone, clutching his backpack tightly to his chest. He didn't live far, but the route took him past a row of abandoned warehouses, a shortcut he hated but couldn't avoid if he wanted to get home before dark. As he turned a corner, voices reached his ears, loud and hostile. His stomach clenched as he spotted a group of older teens leaning against the wall, their shadows stretching long under the dim streetlights. They were older, rougher than Jake's gang. These weren't school bullies. They were trouble. "Hey kid," one of them called. "What's in the bag?" Elliot froze. He knew better than to answer, but his hesitation gave them all the invitation they needed. The tallest one, a guy with a shaved head and a scar down his cheek, stepped forward. "I said," the scared teen repeated, "what's in the bag?" Elliot's throat was dry. He wanted to run, but his legs wouldn't move. The gang closed in, circling him like vultures. One of them grabbed his arm, yanking his backpack away. Another shoved him hard against the wall. "Let's see what we got here," the scared one said, unzipping the bag. He pulled out Elliot's books and tossed them onto the ground. The others laughed, mimicking the way Jake and his gang had done earlier. "Books," one sneered. "What are you, some kind of nerd?" Elliot clenched his fists, feeling the familiar sting of humiliation. But this wasn't just teasing. This was something darker. He looked around desperately, hoping for someone, anyone to help. From the shadows, a figure emerged. It was Mr. Wei. Elliot blinked, convinced he was imagining things. What was Mr. Wei doing here, on this side of town? The teacher's expression was calm, as always, but his eyes had a sharpness Elliot had never seen before. The scared teen noticed him and sneered. "Who's this? Grandpa come to save the day?" Mr. Wei didn't reply. He stepped closer, his movements deliberate and measured. "Let the boy go." The gang burst into laughter. "Or what?" the scared one said, stepping forward. "You gonna teach us a lesson, old man?" Before anyone could react, the scared teen lunged at Mr. Wei, swinging a fist aimed at his face. Elliot flinched, expecting the worst, but what happened next was almost too fast to follow. Mr. Way shifted to the side, his motion fluid and effortless. His hand shot out, grabbing the attacker's wrist and twisting it with such precision that the teen dropped to his knees with a cry of pain. The others hesitated for a moment, then rushed at him together. It was over in seconds. Mr. Way moved like water, dodging punches and disarming a knife with a single smooth motion. He swept one of them off their feet with a low kick and used the momentum of another's attack to send him sprawling into a pile of trash cans. By the time the scared teen scrambled to his feet, he was backing away, his bravado replaced by fear. "Get out of here," Mr. Way said quietly. The gang didn't need to be told twice. They scattered into the night, leaving Elliot and Mr. Way alone in the dimly lit alley. Elliot stared at his teacher, his mouth open in disbelief. Are you a ninja or something?" he stammered. Mr. Way smiled faintly. "Just a teacher." "But how?" "Some things are better left unsaid, Elliot." Mr. Way picked up the boy's scattered books and handed them back. "Go home, and don't take this route again." Elliot wanted to ask more, but something in Mr. Way's tone stopped him. Nodding, he muttered a quick thank you and hurried away, clutching his books tightly. He glanced back once, but Mr. Way was already gone, fading into the shadows as if he had never been there. The next day at school, Elliot was buzzing with a mix of excitement and confusion. His encounter with Mr. Way the previous night felt surreal, like something out of one of his books. He replayed the scene in his mind. The fluid movements, the effortless takedowns, the calm yet commanding presence. It didn't fit with the quiet, unassuming teacher who barely raised his voice in class. But as Elliot walked into the school building, he quickly realized that nobody else seemed to notice anything unusual. Jake and his gang were back to their usual antics, laughing and shoving other students around in the hallway. Mr. Way, as always, strolled to his classroom with his stack of books, his demeanor as serene as ever. Elliot couldn't take it anymore. He approached a group of classmates near their lockers, his voice shaky but urgent. "Hey, you guys won't believe what happened last night." Lisa, one of the more outspoken girls in their grade, rolled her eyes. "What now, Elliot? Did you find a dragon in your backyard?" "No, I'm serious," Elliot insisted. "It's about Mr. Way." Lisa smirked. "What about him? Did he finally grow a backbone?" Elliot hesitated. How could he explain what he'd seen without sounding crazy? "I saw him take down a gang, like a real gang. They tried to rob me, and Mr. Way he fought them off. It was amazing." There was a moment of silence before laughter erupted from the group. Jake, who had overheard the conversation, leaned against a nearby locker, grinning. "Nice try, Elliot," Jake said, shaking his head. "Mr. Way? That guy probably gets winded walking up the stairs." "It's true," Elliot protested. "I saw it with my own eyes. He was so fast and—" Okay, we get it," Jake interrupted, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Mr. Way's a secret kung fu master. Next, you'll tell us he's also a ninja spy." The group dissolved into laughter again, and Elliot felt his face burn with embarrassment. He tried to defend himself, but it was no use. To them, he was just the quiet, bookish kid spinning another wild tale. By lunchtime, the story had spread. Everywhere Elliot went, students snickered or threw mock punches, imitating what they thought Mr. Way's moves might look like. Even teachers seemed amused, though none said anything outright. Elliot slumped in his seat during class, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Mr. Way, meanwhile, continued as if nothing had changed. He led the lesson on symbolism in literature with the same steady tone, his hands folded behind his back as he paced the room. If he noticed the whispers and laughter, he gave no indication. After school, Elliot stayed behind in the library, not wanting to face the jeers in the hallways. He was flipping through a novel absent-mindedly when he heard a familiar voice. "Still here, Elliot?" He looked up to see Mr. Way standing by the bookshelf, his hands tucked into his pockets. The teacher's calm gaze felt strangely reassuring. "Yeah," Elliot muttered. "I didn't feel like going home yet." Mr. Way sat down across from him, his expression thoughtful. "You seem troubled." Elliot hesitated, then blurted out, "Why didn't you tell anyone about what happened last night? About what you did?" Mr. Way smiled faintly. "Why would I?" "Because it was incredible," Elliot said, leaning forward. "You saved me. You took down those guys like it was nothing. People need to know how amazing you are." Mr. Way shook his head. "Elliot, it's not about being amazing. What I did wasn't for recognition. It was to protect you. Nothing more." "But everyone thinks you're weak," Elliot said, his voice rising slightly. They think you don't care about anything, that you just let people walk all over you. Does it matter what they think? Mr. Wei asked gently, or does it matter what you know to be true? Elliot opened his mouth to respond but found himself at a loss for words. Mr. Wei's gaze softened. Sometimes, Elliot, the strongest people are the ones who don't need to prove it. Remember that. Before Elliot could say anything else, Mr. Wei stood and left the library, leaving the boy with more questions than answers. Meanwhile, Jake and his gang were hanging out at the local park, skipping their homework as usual. Jake was still chuckling over Elliot's wild story about Mr. Wei. "Can you imagine?" he said, dribbling a basketball lazily. "That guy couldn't punch his way out of a paper bag." Sam nodded in agreement. "Maybe we should call him Mr. Miyagi from now on." As they joked, 3 older teens strolled into the park. Jake recognized them immediately. They were part of the gang that had attacked Elliot the night before. The scared leader was with them, his piercing eyes scanning the area. Jake tried to play it cool, but his nerves betrayed him. "Ah, hey," he said, forcing a grin. "What's up, guys?" The scared teen stopped a few feet away, crossing his arms. "You punks seen a teacher around here? Skinny guy, glasses, looks like he couldn't fight a kitten." Jake exchanged a nervous glance with Sam and Tyler. No, why?" The gang leader smirked. "He embarrassed us last night. Thought we'd pay him back, but maybe we'll start with you." Jake's cocky facade crumbled as the gang advanced. He tried to back away, but the leader grabbed his shirt, pulling him close. "You think you're tough, huh?" the leader snarled. "Let's see how tough you really are." Just as things were about to escalate, a voice rang out from the edge of the park. "That's enough." The gang turned, their grip on Jake loosening slightly. Standing under the flickering light of a street lamp was Mr. Wei, his silhouette calm and steady. His hands were tucked into his sweater pockets, as though he had merely stopped by for a stroll. Jake's jaw dropped. "Mr. Wei." The gang leader laughed. "You again? You're really making this a habit, old man." Mr. Wei stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "You'll leave the boys alone, now." The leader sneered. "And if we don't?" Mr. Wei didn't answer. Instead, he shifted his stance ever so slightly, his calm demeanor taking on an edge that sent a shiver down Jake's spine. The gang didn't notice, but Jake and his friends could feel it, a subtle, almost invisible change in the air. "Fine," the leader said, shoving Jake to the ground. "We'll deal with you first." As the gang closed in, Jake's heart raced. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Mr. Wei, the quiet, unassuming teacher who barely spoke above a whisper, stood his ground, ready to face them all. The scared leader smirked, cracking his knuckles. "You got guts, old man. Too bad they won't help you." He lunged forward, swinging a wide, heavy fist. Jake winced, expecting Mr. Wei to get flattened, but what happened next defied all logic. With a subtle step to the side, Mr. Wei avoided the punch effortlessly. His movement was so smooth, it almost looked choreographed. Before the leader could react, Mr. Wei's hand shot out, gripping his wrist and twisting it in a fluid motion. The gang leader let out a surprised yelp as he was spun around and pushed to the ground. "Stay down," Mr. Wei said, his voice calm but commanding. The other 2 gang members rushed him, one brandishing a metal pipe. Jake's breath caught in his throat as he watched Mr. Wei duck under the swing of the pipe and sidestep the other attacker's punch. In the blink of an eye, Mr. Wei grabbed the pipe mid-swing, twisting it out of the attacker's hands, and delivered a precise kick to his shin. The thug crumpled to the ground, groaning in pain. The final gang member hesitated, his confidence wavering. Mr. Wei turned to him, his gaze steady. "Do you really want to continue this?" The thug glanced at his leader, still clutching his wrist on the ground, then back at Mr. Wei. With a muttered curse, he turned and ran. The leader and the other gang members scrambled after him, limping and cursing under their breath as they disappeared into the night. Jake, Sam, and Tyler stared in stunned silence. The park, moments ago a battlefield, was now eerily quiet. Mr. Wei adjusted his sweater and turned to the boys, his expression as serene as ever. "Are you all right?" he asked. Jake scrambled to his feet, his cocky demeanor completely gone. What just happened?" Mr. Wei raised an eyebrow. "You were about to be robbed. I stopped it." Jake shook his head. No, I mean, how? What was that? You beat them all up like it was nothing." Mr. Wei gave a faint smile. "It wasn't nothing. It's called Kung Fu." "Kung Fu?" Sam blurted out. "Like in the movies?" Mr. Wei chuckled softly. "Not quite. What you saw was a form of martial arts that emphasizes balance, precision, and restraint. It's not for fighting. It's for protection." Jake gawked at him. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone?" "What purpose would it serve?" Mr. Wei asked. "My role is to teach, not to show off." "But people think you're weak," Tyler said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They think you don't care." Mr. Wei's gaze softened. "Let them think what they will. What matters is how I choose to act when the moment calls for it." The boys exchanged nervous glances. Jake cleared his throat, struggling to find his usual bravado. Thanks. For, saving us." Mr. Wei nodded. "Be careful who you cross paths with in the future, and try not to follow the wrong crowd." The next day at school, word about the incident began to spread. Jake and his gang, previously the school's untouchable bullies, now walked the halls with a noticeable change in demeanor. They kept their heads down, avoiding confrontations and whispering among themselves. For the first time, they seemed uncertain of their place. Elliot, however, couldn't stop smiling. As he passed Jake in the hallway, he gave a small wave. Jake, to Elliot's surprise, nodded back, not with malice, but with something resembling respect. During Mr. Wei's class, Elliot stayed behind after the bell rang. "You saved them, didn't you?" he asked, his voice tinged with awe. Mr. Wei looked up from his desk. "Who told you that?" "No one," Elliot said quickly. "But I can tell. They're different now." Mr. Wei smiled faintly. "People can change, Elliot. Sometimes all they need is reason." Elliot hesitated. "Do you think I could learn? Kung Fu, I mean." Mr. Wei considered him for a moment. "Kung Fu isn't just about fighting. It's about discipline, balance, and understanding yourself. If you're willing to learn those things, then yes, I can teach you." Elliot's face lit up. "I'd like that." The scared gang leader didn't retreat far after his second defeat at the hands of Mr. Wei. Humiliation boiled into fury, and he vowed to end the teacher's interference once and for all. That night he gathered not just his usual crew, but a larger group, more hardened thugs from nearby areas, each armed and eager for a fight. Meanwhile, Jake, Sam, and Tyler couldn't shake the memory of what they'd seen. The sight of Mr. Wei calmly dismantling the gang had etched itself into their minds, forcing them to question everything they thought they knew about strength and authority. The next morning, rumors swept through the school, spurred by Jake's whispered accounts. Students began speculating about Mr. Wei's past, with wild theories ranging from him being a former spy to an underground martial arts champion. Elliot overheard the chatter but said nothing. He knew what he had seen and what Mr. Wei had told him. Kung Fu wasn't about fame or recognition, it was about purpose and balance. Still, Elliot couldn't help but feel a surge of pride for the man who had saved him. That afternoon, the gang leader and his crew marched boldly into the school grounds, ignoring the protests of the security staff. Armed with weapons and adrenaline, they made their way to Mr. Wei's classroom, their presence drawing terrified stares from students and teachers alike. Jake, Sam, and Tyler spotted them first. Panic gripped the trio as they realized the thugs were gunning for Mr. Wei. Without thinking, they rushed to find Elliot. "Elliot," Jake hissed, grabbing his arm, "they're here. That gang, Wei's gang, they're looking for him." Elliot's face paled. "We have to stop them." "How?" Sam stammered. "They're armed. We're just kids." Elliot straightened his shoulders, determination burning in his eyes. "Then we need to warn Mr. Wei." In his classroom, Mr. Wei stood calmly as the gang leader stormed in, flanked by his crew. Desks scraped against the floor as students scrambled out of the way, their fearful whispers filling the room. "Well, look who it is," the leader sneered. "The old man who thinks he's a hero. Let's see how you handle yourself now, teacher." Mr. Wei sighed softly and adjusted his glasses. "This is a school. You don't belong here." Big words for someone who's about to get crushed. The leader spat, raising his weapon. Before the gang could advance, Jake, Sam, Tyler, and Elliot burst into the room. "Wait," Jake yelled. "Stop." The gang leader smirked. "You got fans now, old man." Elliot stepped forward, his voice steady despite his fear. "You don't know who you're dealing with." "Oh, I think I do," the leader said, laughing. "Some washed-up nobody who got lucky last time." Elliot shook his head. "You don't understand. Mr. Wei isn't just a teacher. He's a Kung Fu master." The words hung in the air, electrifying the room. The gang leader chuckled, dismissing the claim, but his crew shifted uneasily. Mr. Wei's reputation had already begun to spread beyond the school walls. "Enough talk," the leader snapped. "Let's end this." As the gang charged, Mr. Wei moved with a grace that defied his appearance. His hands, steady as always, became a blur of motion as he deflected blows, disarmed weapons, and neutralized each attacker with pinpoint precision. Students and staff crowded at the doorway, their mouths agape as the quiet teacher transformed into a whirlwind of controlled power. One by one, the gang members fell, their weapons clattering to the ground. Mr. Wei used every part of his surroundings, desks, chairs, even the walls, to outmaneuver and incapacitate his opponents. But he never struck with unnecessary force. His every move was deliberate, designed to protect without inflicting permanent harm. The scared leader, now the last man standing, hesitated. His confidence was shattered, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. He swung wildly with a pipe, but Mr. Wei caught it mid-air, twisting it out of his hands with ease. "This isn't a fight you can win," Mr. Wei said softly, his tone more empathetic than angry. "Go home." The leader, defeated and humiliated once again, dropped to his knees. His crew dragged him away, leaving the classroom in stunned silence. As the crowd dispersed, whispers turned into murmurs, and murmurs turned into shouts of astonishment. By the end of the day, the entire school knew the truth. Mr. Wei wasn't just a teacher. He was a legend. Over the next few weeks, the culture at Riverstone High began to change. Jake and his friends stopped their bullying, taking Mr. Wei's words to heart. Elliot walked the halls with newfound confidence, knowing he had someone who believed in him. As for Mr. Wei, he continued teaching with the same quiet dignity, his legendary skills remaining a whispered secret among those who witnessed them. But to those who knew the truth, he was more than a teacher. He was their silent protector. And somewhere in the shadows of Riverstone, his legend grew.